Welcome to the Be Nice podcast, where we dive into conversations that help us recognize, understand, and take action when it comes to mental health and suicide prevention. I'm Christy Buck, your host. I've been working in mental health for 40 years, and I founded a program and initiative with an action plan. That action plan is called Be Nice. We took the word nice, made it into an acronym. Notice invite, challenge, and empower. 4 steps that can change lives. Together, we're going to share real stories. We're going to share insights. We're going to share tools. And we're going to work to break down the stigma around mental health, which is the number one barrier why people do not seek help and treatment. This is our very first episode. And today, we thought it would be a great idea to understand what Be Nice is, how it started, the brains that went into the plan, and where we're going. Joining me today to have this discussion about the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan is the Director of Programming and Expansion, my good friend, Kat Lanting. In this episode, we're going to explore the journey that started with a simple yet powerful idea. And we're also going to share our hopes and visions to you all for this podcast, what you can expect, the kind of conversations that we're going to have. Most of all, before we dive in, please note that we will be discussing suicide. That is the work that we are in to prevent suicide. Make sure that while you're listening, you're taking care of yourself. If at all you need to take a break from us, we hope not, but you may need to. Come on back and then join us again. We want to remind everyone that at all times, we need to remind folks that there is a crisis hotline for those who may be struggling and need to have conversations with someone. That number is 988. And also, there's a text line, 741-741. So, whether you're new to Be Nice or a longtime supporter, we are thrilled to have you on this journey. So, let's get started. So today's mental health myth kind of goes along with what we're going to be talking about, Kat. And that is that if someone is thinking about suicide or thinking about killing themselves, we may give them the idea and encourage them to take action. So we're going to bust the myth. So that is a myth. And this is why the Mental Health Foundation is doing the work we need to do, because yes, we need to be talking about suicide. Ultimately, understanding suicide, being able to ask someone if they are thinking of suicide, actually helps that person know that there's help, that there's resources, that opening up that conversation may be the biggest stress reliever to that person. A study published in the Journal of American Medical Association, CAT, found that asking about suicide in a compassionate and non-judgmental way, they can actually reduce distress and suicidal thoughts in a person who you may be asking that. So we're going to learn about the question a little bit later also, but now here to talk more about we're doing the work we do in this space is my coworker, Kat Lanting. Kat has been with Be Nice since 2011, and she has learned a lot. First and foremost, I might go back to her before she starts asking me. Kat, tell us what brought you to the Mental Health Foundation in 2011.
Oh, wow. Well, in 2011, I was an AmeriCorps member. So if any of our listeners don't know a lot about AmeriCorps, please look it up, check it out. If you are in a gap year in your life and you're thinking about some service in a service industry of wanting to give back, and the Mental Health Foundation was under the umbrella organization of Cherry Street Health Services and accepting AmeriCorps members. And I had a good friend who was serving at the organization, and Christy said, yeah, we could use more service. So I walked in and just fell in love with the work that the Mental Health Foundation was doing, and fell in love with the work you were doing, Christy. So excited to talk more about how that started. I know a lot, but excited to learn more. And isn't it interesting that question? I think that first question about are you thinking about suicide might have been the inception of what we're having the conversation of today. So, can I get started with you being the guest here today?
It's a pleasure to be here today, Kat.
We have Christy Buck, the CEO of the Mental Health Foundation. When I walked in 2011, you were the executive director. So when did you become the executive director of the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan?
So the journey started back in about 28 years ago, and that was a couple years after the foundation had been created. And the organization was created by Touchstone and Avare, which was the largest case management agency in West Michigan. And at the time, they had a lot of fundraising opportunities. And so they had raised a lot of money, and it was suggested create a foundation to be able to potentially do some of the hard work that you're doing also. So at that time, it was a grant-giving organization, and we would give grants out on behalf of the clients, consumers of Touchstone and Avare who had unmet needs. So it was about that time that I would be going out and doing a lot of different presentations. Most of the presentations were myth and fact. So the PowerPoint that I had up on the screen a long time ago would flip to, this is a myth, and here is the fact. And then it was in hopes that potentially maybe the folks we were presenting to would turn around and get involved in either donations, or maybe they would want to attend an event we were having. So it was really fundraising. Mm-hmm. So then we knocked on the door of a high school to see if we could get some students that would potentially want to do some volunteer work or get involved. So again, we're in front of a group of students in a classroom at a high school called Forest Hills Eastern. And while we were at Forest Hills Eastern, the teacher at the end of the session came up and said, would you come back every week? Your material is so much better than an old-fashioned psychology book. Mm-hmm. So another co-presenter and I went back to the office, and we huddled together, and we said we could do this. So my undergrad degree was, and before I extended it with social work, was recreational therapy. So I had done that my whole life, create activities that would engage people to understand.
Yeah.
So we created this kick butt curriculum. And at the time, I had a vase on my desk, and it said Live, Laugh, Love on it. And I said, well, this would be a cool name for this program. So it was called Live, Laugh, Love, Educating Our Youth About Mental Health. So we had 8 lessons. Then we brought on another good friend of mine, and she was taking a hiatus from teaching. So she had experience in curriculum development. So then we would go out, teach it, come back with what the lesson was. She may add an activity. We would go back, try it out. So all of a sudden, within 3 months, we had an amazing program. So with that, it led me to go knock on some other doors and see if other folks in school districts were willing to potentially bring this officially into their school. Mm-hmm. So the first door I knocked on was the middle school where my kids were students. And immediately the superintendent liked me as a parent, liked me with who I was in the world of mental health, but immediately said, whoa, I don't think we should be talking about suicide in our classrooms.
So that was originally right away you had a lesson about suicide.
Immediately we had a lesson about suicide. Okay. And so we showed him what the lesson would be, and immediately I busted the myth by repeating to him that actually that is a myth. That if we talk about it, it doesn't mean that someone is going to go die by suicide. So he said, okay, we're going to do this program. So we wrote up a grant through the state of Michigan, and that was part of the grant, was to go back into this classroom. And with that, we brought some people with lived experience who had struggled and who still struggled with mental illness. And so it's kind of fun now with this podcast that now we're also going to be doing that every time we have a new episode it's going to be bringing back a person
Yeah.
with lived experience.
Right. And that's how we learn, right? Is hearing those stories. I remember some of those people were still there doing that portion when I started too. And what besides that? So were you educating? Because now with Be Nice, we have this staff portion. Were you educating staff at that time? I mean, what was the biggest barrier to getting into schools besides, I don't know if we should talk about suicide prevention. Were there any other barriers?
I think that the biggest barrier was that even turned into a little bit of parents not understanding. So at the beginning, there were permission forms that had to go home to parents to have their child opt in.
Yeah.
And we typically did not get resistance, but it was. I mean, we're talking, this was back in 2005. This was not being talked about. We were ahead of the game. People didn't have an understanding that something called ADD, ADHD, those are considered mental health disorders.
Yeah. Didn't we get a call back to the office?
We sure did. We sure did. And we got called into the principal's office. And for some districts, it's hard to take on those challenges. But the further that, you get the backing of the right people in a school district, and Kat, even to this day, we got to start at that top. So everybody believes that this is a valuable program. So we would get, in one particular school district, it went all the way to the school board actually putting it into their policy under health education. So right under sex ed was suicide prevention, mental health training, and their health class was going to cover those subjects. So, and that was early. As we've grown, and this really well, there's a lot of people in the same lane, and we're all on the same mission, and that is to have zero suicide. I'm a believer that if we get everybody on board, potentially we could not have suicide anymore, not have someone die by suicide.
So what is, if you can think off the top of your head, one of the earliest, best stories of a student or a parent, really going through those early classes when it's not different now, it's the same curriculum. But I know you pulled a lot of students out of class when you were in there doing the teaching yourself and one of those individuals who had lived experience. Do you have one story of a student that you could tell us? Yeah,
there are several stories, but it was an incredible when there would be a student that would stay after class or when a student needed to leave during class. Typically I would be a person to follow that person out, or I would have them remain after class with me. So one incident was a student had gotten up from class. We were showing a movie, and the movie is called More Than Sad. So it's a movie put out by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and that's when we were using other products from folks. Now we create our own.
Yep.
But in that situation, she did get up, walk out of the class. She had to come back in to get her books. So I grabbed her and had her sit down for a moment. And I said, you walked out of the movie, and this is a suicide prevention movie. And we talk a lot about mental health and suicide. I need to ask you this question. Are you thinking of suicide? And she said back to me, and she looked me straight in the face and said, I would never do that. My dad did it. And I said, well, that must have been difficult. So then what happened was, because I noticed and I invited myself into this conversation, I was able to challenge her with the resources that I knew that were available. And it was really sad because after her dad had died by suicide and she was in elementary school when this happened, she was sent on the bus that same day to go to school.
Wow.
And so to think about how, if we look now, Kat, fast forward, because this was even before Be Nice. This is when we were doing this Live, Laugh, Love program. Fast forward now, how we're talking so much about trauma and we're talking about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. that's what happened.
Yeah.
And this girl had never had any type of treatment or services for something absolutely traumatic and so hard.
For sure.
So there's oodles of stories like that. And I think now, Kat, we get awesome oodles of stories of people now that sat through those classes. I see people at the grocery store. On Facebook, I just ran into somebody who is on a board of directors somewhere and said, I sat in your classroom.
Yeah.
And brings me a lot of joy to hear good stories of resilience.
Giving people the opportunity to have that conversation early on. I remember one of the challenges being the concern that a mental health professional's office would be more inundated with conversations from young people. And then the turnaround, I remember one specific school district, and then the turnaround for that mental health professional was she then presenting with us at a mental health conference. And her presentation, her main topic was the quality of information I'm getting from students, and then my call home to parents is just so much more awesome. So creating that program just early on must have been such an incredible thing, because even in the time that I've been here with you, teaching that has just been such a change in our conversation in mental health in the years. So what do you think has been the biggest change besides the reduction in that stigma? Is there anything else that's been a change specifically in West Michigan?
Well, I think, and I've heard this before, so I don't think I'm saying anything false. I think we have been the leaders in the community. And it could have been just the fact that 23 years ago, we created a walk, Stomp Out Stigma for Mental Health. I mean, we've always
That's
been...
in May, by the way, listeners.
I know.
Come and hang out.
Yeah.
Well, Christy will tell you more about it. Keep listening.
But it's, there were things that we were doing. And that was part of my job. I was getting paid to do things where we could increase awareness and decrease stigma. So everything we were doing back then was exactly about what needed to be done. So now when people talk about the history and the Mental Health Foundation, we're thanked for the work that we did. There's a lot more people in this area now that are doing mental health awareness, suicide prevention. We want to collaborate along because we know it, Kat. No one has an action plan like we do. And that is something that was not, Be Nice was in my head. It went on to a T-shirt. But the program is a love and passion for a lot of people, not just me.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. So now we've got these lessons in classrooms, and now it's like, all right, there's so many classrooms to teach. How can we bring this out to more individuals? So now Be Nice comes to life. So what's the story of that? How does that start?
Yeah. So we, at one point, we were probably in 30 different classrooms.
Yeah.
So I also had a lot of contracted folks. So we had some folks that were working third shift at psychiatric hospitals in and around the area, and they were looking for more gigs, right? So we had really good people teaching the program. And then there was a death by suicide in 2010 of a young man. His name was Tyler Clemente, and Tyler was a freshman. He was a new student. He had a beautiful life at Rutgers University, had found love, had found passion for himself that he didn't have when he was in high school. And unfortunately, his roommate felt that he could take and expose his roommate and his roommate's lifestyle. And so what he did was he brought shame and embarrassment to Tyler, who had never come out about being gay. So Tyler then died by suicide. And what happened following that death was just a national conversation about specifically cyberbullying. So suddenly the hot topic was bullying. And then also on top of it all, cyberbullying. So we were being challenged on that time. What are y'all doing about bullying? What are you doing about cyberbullying? What are you doing to support the LGBT community? So we were doing the work that we needed to be doing. We were talking about the fact that bullying, cyberbullying, LGBTQ, those are all risk factors that could bring about someone to potentially struggle, potentially a person to even have thoughts of suicide. So at that time, nobody was talking about the big thing, and that was mental health, mental illness. They were talking about specifically those three risk factors and not the big picture. So one thing we decided was, I just said, we're be nice. Let's start to have a discussion about the fact that how we treat one another is going to have an effect on someone's mental health in a good way and then also in a very negative way. So then we were asked to do assemblies. We were asked to do be nice assemblies. And I'm like, okay, what are we doing now? What are we doing? We're going to get in front of kindergartners, sixth graders. So we did. We created. I found some help and some volunteers that were part of a project. They didn't know that getting their master's degree in physical therapy was going to turn into volunteering and being in an assembly. So all of a sudden, there we are. And then 9 months later, we're asked to do another assembly, and it is at that certain assembly that the action plan was created. Notice, invite, challenge, and empower. And Kat, you were present at that.
It was a good assembly. Yep.
Very impactful. And it really changed what we were doing. It changed to know that we had now this Be Nice had legs, a lot of legs. It had 4 legs. It was like a jaguar. And
it had the ability to go into hands of others, right? Hey, anybody can use this plan, right? You don't have to be a mental health professional to teach the plan. We will give this plan to you, and you take it and put it into the hands of individuals that are lay people. Really awesome.
Exactly. And that's where it goes back to, Kat, one of those concerns that the social workers and counselors had in these buildings is our doors are going to be flooded.
Right.
Well, now the program is something where potentially maybe a friend has helped me through that challenging step that I had, that I failed a test. And right?
Yep.
Now we're training people. Maybe you're the person. You don't have to be the counselor. Get them to resources, but also maybe with your help, something can be averted.
Right. What are my resources? Awesome. Well, and now we have a podcast, right? Reaching even more ears. So what is your biggest hope for this podcast here? You mentioned having people with lived experience. Any other hopes for
I hope that it will help us find more folks that want to bring Be Nice to their businesses, communities, their schools. I hope that it may resonate with someone who may be struggling with a mental health disorder. And also, I really hope it'll help families who may have a loved one that is struggling with a mental health disorder and how they can help them. It's a difficult journey to have any illness. And we know if someone was diagnosed with cancer or diabetes or any type of illness, people would want to help.
Yep.
And in turn, if we can reduce the stigma, maybe just you'll find your spot to be able to help another person.
Yeah, sharing this podcast out with one other person is doing that help. Awesome. All right. That's my interview of you for today.
So,
thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Be Nice podcast. Together, I believe we may have busted a harmful myth and learned about how Be Nice came to be. We hope that by sharing these stories on soon to be real stories and real life situations, we can continue to break down that stigma. That is the number one barrier. So remember, if today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone else. Do not forget those lines of communication that you can open up for people that may be struggling. And that is 741-741 texting line. And then also the talk line 988. Until next time, be nice. It can change a life.